Afikoman. You hide the afikoman and you have to do it. Now, you ever think about it? What type of training is that for the kids? What you're doing is basically you're breaking the matzah and you're saying, if you steal this, you'll get a prize. Like, okay, so we're training the kids to steal. And then what happens when they steal? They say, okay, here's the matzah, but now they negotiate with you. Okay, I know, I want a bike. And I'm not going to give you a bike, I'll give you rollerblades. And then you say, no, I'll give you roller skate. And you start, okay, fine. No Xbox, maybe PlayStation. You do all these things and finally, what type of chinuch is this? How are you training your kids like this? You understand the question? It makes absolutely no sense.
You have to find it.
Some of them would steal it, would go run. In my house, when I was younger, it got very violent with my grandfather.
Yeah,
I got black and blue marks.
Once he finds it, the other one's going to get happy. The other one's not going to be happy.
Then everybody gets. Yeah. It gets very violent.
I have a question. Are you allowed to finish the meal without being done?
No, you have to eat the afikoman. Afikoman is so.
You have to eat the afikoman?
Do you have to really? You can negotiate, right?
You negotiate, but it's bad that people that say, okay, you know what, I have another matzah, you take it over here and you do that. You should get
whoever finds it has to eat it?
No, the person who finds it, you go and you bring it back to the head of the household, and he goes and he. What? No problem.
After the Seder, right?
What?
After the Seder.
After the Seder. Yeah, at the end of the Seder. At the end, not at like right before benching. So to understand this concept, I'm gonna tell you this amazing story. So no, after because you're eating bread. So there was once a person by the name of Abe. Abe fell madly in love with Sarah, and the type of relationship that they had was everybody was upset. They had like this crazy infatuated love. They were married they're married already for 2 years, but they didn't have any kids. And everybody knew, they saw that couple, they knew this was like the perfect couple. He was good looking, she was good looking, and they were just like so madly in love with each other. Abe thought that he's the luckiest guy in the entire world that he married a girl like Sarah. And Sarah thought she's the luckiest girl in the entire world that she married a guy like Abe. Everybody wanted to have a marriage like they had. The word was coming out that the Nazis are getting closer and closer to their town. So they went and everyone tried to start getting visas to get out because they heard what the Nazis were doing around Europe. They went and for whatever reasons, Abe was able to procure a visa for his wife Sarah, but he wasn't able to procure a visa for himself due to his family background. He wasn't able to get a visa, but for Sarah he was able to get a visa. And so the times are getting closer and closer. Sarah's getting closer and closer. I mean, the Nazis are getting closer and closer to coming to into their town. So Abe goes to Sarah and says, "Listen, honey, you need to leave." And she's like, "There's no way. I'm not leaving. You don't have a visa yet." And he's like, "No, you go, and then I'll follow." And she's like, "No, absolutely not." He's like, "Wherever you're going, I'm going." And he's like, "Listen, and they're arguing about this for days, back and forth. Finally, they realize it's not gonna, the Nazis are here, and it's gonna be any day. Abe go without asking, and he goes and he buys a train ticket out for Sarah, and he doesn't tell her until an hour before the train leaves. And he goes over to Sarah and he says, "Listen, honey, I need to talk to you about something." And she already knew. She's like, "Don't even bother. I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving. Wherever you go, I go." And he says, "Listen." And he goes to her and he says, "Listen." He says, "How do you think I'm going to feel if, God forbid, something happens to you?" He says, "If you really love me, you'll go. Go for me." And she says, "Abe, I can't live without you." And they're going back and forth, and tears are starting to come down her face, and she's like, "Please don't let me do this." And Abe says, "I'm begging you to do this for me." And he goes, and she just sits on the couch and starts crying. He goes into her room and he packs her bags. 20 minutes later, he comes out with her luggage, and he says, "Come on, let's go." And she goes and she gives him this tremendous hug and does not want to let go. And he says, "Listen, babe, the train's leaving. We got to go." He's trying to hold back his emotions, and he sees that she's not letting go, and he says, "You know what?" He says, "I have an idea I have an idea that's going to make this simpler for you." He goes into the bedroom, he takes out their one wedding picture. He takes their wedding picture and he cuts it right down in half. And actually he doesn't. He actually gives her the whole picture. She goes and he goes to her and he says, "Take this and put it in your when you get to the place that you're going to go." Yeah, so she says she takes the picture and she rips it in half. And she keeps him for her, and she gives her to him, right? So she has her picture, he has his picture. And he's like, "I'm not putting anything." He says, "When you come find me, we're going to put this picture together again, we'll hang it up in our house." And he says, "You got yourself a deal." And he goes and he puts her on the train, and he says, "Go to your aunt in LA. Go to your aunt in LA. As soon as I get a visa, I'm coming out." And as she gets on the train, she turns around and she says, "Come to me as fast as you can. I cannot be here without you." And he says, "I promise." Abe said, "I will. I promise." And she gets on the train. And a few days later, the Nazis came into town before Abe was able to procure a visa. He goes and he gets rounded up into the labor camps. And he realizes as they're rounding up all the Jews, he could only take one thing with him. So he says, that he could sneak out. He's not going to, he can't go to labor camps with luggage, with your Louis Vuitton bags, right? So he finds that picture and he hides it on him, and that's all he takes. And he goes from labor camp to labor camp. The months turn into years, and he sees his family, his friends, everybody just die in front of him. Those times, if you ever read stories in the Holocaust, there were people known as dead people, which means they were dead inside. They were just the emotions were just like walking zombies. They couldn't have any emotion anymore. It's just too much for them. So the one thing that kept Abe going is that picture. And every night before he went to sleep, he would go and he would talk to Sarah. And he says, hey honey, listen, today was was a hard day, and I didn't eat much today. I didn't eat in 3 days. And he keeps on talking to her. And all his bunkmates are like, thinking, this guy, what's he doing? This guy's crazy. Why is he talking to a picture? But they didn't have the audacity to tell. This is the only thing that made him sane. Everybody else was gone already. At least it says if this is keeping him sane, let him talk. Middle of the night, they hear some guy talking to himself in the corner. They're like, fine, let him talk. So the time progressed, and he hid this little picture wherever he went. The word was coming out that the Americans are coming and they're liberating all the Nazis. And they're liberating all the Jews from the Nazis. He goes, and one day they're working out in the sun, and they're talking about this, and they all get excited, and it was a particular hot day, so everyone takes off their coat, their jackets, and they're working in the field. And, they're getting so like, oh, who are you going to see when you get out? And they're all like fantasizing what they're going to do to the Nazis, and, who they're going to see their loved ones, and yada, yada, yada. So they're all high in spirits. And before they knew it, it was the end of the day, and they all got rounded up and brought back to the camps. As they were walking back to the camps, Abe realized, I left my jacket back in the labor camps. And he's like, oh my God. He's like, he couldn't care less about the jacket. He cared about what was hidden in the jacket. And that was a picture of Sarah. And he's like, I got to go back. And he's looking at if you know anything about the Nazis, everything is exact. If you step out of line, they shoot first and ask questions later. Right? They don't ask questions. So he's like, I can't, I need the picture. I can't. So when they get back into the bunk, he tells all his bunkmates, which is now his new family, and he says, guys, listen, I'm sneaking out tonight. I'm going to get the picture. And they're like, what are you, crazy? He says, in a few days we're getting liberated. Why are you going to go and, kill yourself or risk your life for a picture? Wait for the real thing. So they're convincing him, don't do it, you're crazy. They're like, listen, they sit him down and they said, if we have to physically restrain you, we'll restrain you. He says, we saw too many of our family members and our friends die. I'm not going to sit there and watch you die also. Bless you. So he figured, he says, you know what? I see that I'm not getting anywhere with this. And he says, okay, fine, I won't go. He says, maybe tomorrow we're going to go into the same place and, I'll hopefully find it then. And he really meant it. And he sits at night, when people went to bed, they were exhausted. They fell asleep instantly. And he couldn't fall asleep. He is tossing and turning. He says he can't fall asleep. For years, he's been falling asleep talking to this picture. How is he going to not talk to the picture now? And he tries for an hour, 2 hours, and nothing to it. He says, that's it. I'm going back. He goes, and he decides he's going to go sneak back into the labor camp, see if he can get it. So he goes and he climbs out of his bunk through the back window, and he starts, crawling through. There was patrol, and there were people on guard, and something that would have taken maybe a half-hour walk to him took like 2 hours. And, he's going, hiding behind the bushes everywhere that's a shady city. There's certain spots that he had to sit there for 20 minutes just to wait till the guards left, and he could sneak to the next shade. Within 2 hours, he got to the part where he worked, and he found his jacket. He took the jacket, he threw it back on. He felt for the part of the secret compartment. It's like he's there. It's like awesome. Now he's got to make the trek back. As he's walking back, he sees a truck, and this is like well past 2 a.m. He sees a truck leaving the concentration camp, and he's thinking it's like the labor camp. And he's like that's Nazis work on clockwork. There's nothing that happens at 2 a.m. He says they don't. It's not. Everything happens exactly. It's like it's very odd. So he goes and he hides in the bushes. He's not sure what's going on for another half hour. He sees that there's no more trucks, and he goes and he continues on the road back. And he goes back, and it takes him another 2 hours. As he gets close to his bunk, his heart just sinks. He sees that the light's on. And he's like, the lights don't go on at 3 a.m. in the night. And his knees start buckling, and he's just worried about who knows what happened. He goes in. And he's slowly, and he just sits by the window of his bunk, just sitting, listening to. He doesn't hear anything for 15 minutes. He's sitting, not a sound. He goes and he slowly climbs in to peek inside the window, and he just fell down on the floor and started crying uncontrollably. His entire bunk, blood everywhere, bodies everywhere. Everybody was shot and killed, And he started crying. He's like, it's all my fault. He's like, they probably came in the middle of the night to do a head count. And they saw I wasn't there. And they said, where is this guy? And nobody wanted to give me up. And because of that, they killed my whole bunk. And he's like ripping his clothes. He's like, I just killed, who knows how many people just because of my... And he couldn't, crying uncontrollably. Suddenly, something else caught his attention. Is that he saw in the next bunk, the light was also open. And he's like, okay, no, there's something weird going on over here. And he's like, and there was no Nazis. It was extra quiet at that time. So he goes and he sneaks in again to the next bunk and he peeks in and he sees the same scene. And he falls down on the floor and he realizes what happened. He says the Nazis they knew that the Americans were coming, so there were certain times where they just came and they just tried to kill as much people as they can. Just shot them up and then, worry about them the next day. So he's like, that's probably what they did. And he's thinking, like, what am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to, they probably think I'm still in that pile, of dead bodies. And he's not sure what to do. He climbs back into his bunk and apologizing and nonstop crying to his friends as he takes their blood and starts smearing it on his body. Starts ripping his clothes and and putting blood on his face, on his body to try to, they're going to come to account. What is, they're going to be one missing. There's nowhere that he could hide or run. He's apologizing to them and he sits on the floor amongst the bodies and he just cries the rest of the night. And he hears trucks that are coming and he pretends, and this is already the next day, so he pretends that he's dead and whatever. He closes his eyes. For people that went through the Holocaust, it wasn't hard to pretend to be dead. He goes in pretending to be dead, and he hears people come in, and he hears orders being that, and then he feels like bodies being moved under him, and then suddenly he feels himself being thrown over somebody's shoulder, and he goes and he feels himself getting walked, and the last thing that he remembers before falling unconscious is the loud noise that his head made against the metal truck when they threw him into the truck, and he got knocked unconscious. And then in fact, it was a good thing that he got knocked unconscious because now he really looked dead. And he doesn't know when he woke up. He woke up sometime later with a tremendous pressure on top of him. And he realized from the little crack of the light that he saw was that they put him in a mass burial. They thought that he was dead and they put him in a mass burial. So he was sitting over there and he was going in and out of consciousness for he thinks that it was days. Who knows how long it was. And finally he's going out, blood loss and all the pressure, and he's like, what am I going to sit here to be starved alive? And he starts screaming, just shoot me. He says, shoot me, just shoot me. And, somebody just happens to be walking by and they see that he thought he was screaming, but it wasn't louder than a whisper, but he sees something moving in there. So they quickly take off, start removing the bodies, and they see some guy moving, they take him, and the last thing that he remembered before falling again unconscious is being put on a stretcher and thinking, Nazis don't do this they don't put you on a stretcher, they shoot you over there. And the next time when he wakes up, he's in a hospital setting, in a hospital bed. And they tell him that, you're lucky that, there was Americans that came and liberated, your camp. And you're lucky that somebody just happened to be walking past by when you were moving and they saw you and they pulled you out. And he slowly recuperated over a few weeks. As he got better, they put him in a DP camp, a displacement camp, which is a camp that they go and they have to find out which family or relatives, are still alive, and with all the list. And he goes and he looks for all his family relatives, all dead. And he thinks, all right, there's nothing left to do, but let me go back, let me go find my wife. So he arranges to go to America. From America, he arranges to go to LA. After weeks and weeks of traveling, he ends up at his wife's aunt's doorstep. And she sees him, she turns white. And he's like, is Sarah here? And she's like, no. She's like, we she couldn't even speak. She's like, we inquired about you. And they told us your entire bunk, you included, were all killed. And he says, well, I'm not dead. I'm here. She's like, where's Sarah? And he's like, when Sarah heard that you died, she went in complete depression. And she just fell into depression and, she's in the hospital now. So he's like, quickly, what are we waiting for? Let's go. So they start going on the way to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, Abe asks, Sarah's aunt and says, can we please stop by to buy some flowers? And, her aunt's like, listen, you're not going for some surprise birthday party. Just go see your wife. You didn't see her for so many years. And Abe says, listen, I know how the doctors are going to think. They're not going to just let me walk into someone who's depressed. She'll die from the shock. Just go, please, let's go get some flowers. So they agree, they go get the flowers. They get to the hospital, they get in front of her room. And Abe says, I'm not going to go in, but he takes out a picture and he clips it onto the flowers and says, you bring that to Sarah. The second that she sees the picture, her eyes start swelling up. The aunt, and she says, you two are really made for each other. He says the entire years that Sarah was by me, she had the same exact picture, and she was always carrying it, always looking at it wherever she went. And she takes the pictures and with the flowers, and she goes into the hospital room, and she sits down over there, and she says to and Sarah just takes a glimpse at the picture. She grabs the flowers, throws it on the floor, and takes a picture and says, "Who gave this to you?" And her aunt says, "There's a man outside that wants to come meet you." And for the first time in days, she sits in her bed and she turns around, and in walks Abe, and they just froze. And Abe walks closer, and Sarah's like, "Abe?" And Abe replies, "Sarah?" And for the next 5 minutes, all they said was their names. They just kept on repeating each other's names and crying. It says that this family ended up living in LA to the high 90s. In their wall in the living room, you see nothing but a small picture. One completely faded out, and one is a picture of Abe. Now, when we go and we break the matzah, and what are we doing over here? What we're showing is God represents the big half, and we're hiding that piece, and we're telling our kids, you go find God. God is hidden in this. In our exile, God is hidden. Go and find God. If you go and find God, then you can get whatever you want. What do you want? We want a bike. You want this. You want that. Whatever you want, as long as you go and find God. But now, why do we have to hide it? And the answer is because nobody looks for something that's not hidden. It says God is hidden in this world. You have to go and find Him. We're teaching our kids not to steal, not to negotiate, but it says when you go find God, anything that you want, you could have. And that is a lesson that we are teaching our kids. And people are confusing. They're fighting it back and forth, and then they say, "Okay, I'm not going to give you this. I'm not going to give you that." It's a complete lesson that you could teach, that you're teaching for your kids. So the idea behind it is, and I'll tell you, I guess I could explain it through a different. This is
That was a true story?
Yeah. Based on a true story. I know it's based on a true story. It's based on a true story.
I'm not sticking to that.
The last time I said the story, they said that they have to make a movie out of this or something.
Sure. I was just thinking it's a good question.
Yeah. So, but the idea is not this is the lesson from the story. When you go searching for God, the way that Abe, you hold on that piece of God that you have, that little piece of God that in the mashal, the nimshal, the way that we have to learn from it is when you look for God, like Abe was looking for Sarah, like Abe talked to Sarah every night, you're going to get whatever you want. You'll get Sarah. You'll get whatever you want. You have to have that want. You have to have that need. There's another way to understand this breaking of the matzah. I wasn't sure if I was going to say this story tonight. This is brought in the Ben Ish Chai. Ben Ish Chai says there was once 3 friends. They were very, very close, and they went and it was getting older on that they had to start looking for careers. So they decided they're each going to go and learn a certain science. In 5 years' time, they're going to come back to this certain exact location, and they're going to all say what they show the other friends what they learned. Ben Ish Chai says this. Yeah. So they go and they separate. 5 years later, they meet in the exact same spot. And all the friends are like, "Oh, so what did you guys learn?" And it was, no one learned something better than what I learned. And everyone was upping the other guys as well. What I have, you're not going to do. So they set themselves down and over a few brewskis, and they say, "All right, cough it up. What's the first guy?" So the first guy says, "I learned how to create a telescope. I could stand over here and I could see very far away as if it's very close." And all the friends were like, "Wow, that's pretty awesome." And the other guy says, "I was able to create an automobile. I could get very far places in very short amounts of time." And they said, "That's crazy. That's awesome." And the last guy says, "I created a medicine that could heal all ailments." And they're like, "Wow, that's pretty crazy." So they said, "Let's try it out." So they're sitting there in the hills, and they say, "Look, let's go point it at the king's castle. Let's see what's going on in the king's castle." So they take this telescope and they point it at the king's castle, and they see that everyone's crowded over the princess. And they zoom in on the princess, and they see the princess doesn't look well. She looks sick, and there's doctors there, and they're trying to do medicine, and they're saying, the princess is sick. So the guy with the automobile says, "Quickly, come, let's jump into my car and let's travel to the princess." So they all jump into the car and they drive very fast, and they get to the castle. And they get to the castle, they all jump out, and they say, "What's wrong with the princess?" And says she's deathly ill, and no medicine is working. So the guy with the medicine said, "Listen, I got medicine. I could help her." So the king says, "Please try whatever you can." And he goes and he gives her the medicine, and she becomes better. So the king goes over to all of these three friends, and he says, "Listen," he says, "all of you are going to get rewarded beyond your wildest dreams." He says, "You saved my only daughter." He says, "One of you are going to marry her, and the other two I'm going to make you high governors. But to say who's going to marry her, that's you guys going to have to decide upon amongst yourselves." So the guy with the telescope said, "Listen, I should marry her, because if I wouldn't have seen her, we wouldn't have been able to, nothing would have happened." So the guy with the automobile said, "You could have seen, but without my car, you wouldn't have gotten anywhere." And the guy with the medicine said, "Listen, with all your automobile and with all your telescope, you could have gotten there and done what? It's all me, my medicine." So they're arguing back and forth. The king said, listen, I see that you're not figuring it out. Let's go and ask my daughter. So they go to the daughter and they say, you decide. Who is going to, who do you want to marry? So she goes over to the guy with the telescope and says, you're right. I really need, you were really crucial in this. If not for you, we wouldn't have been here. You guys wouldn't have been able to save me. And she goes over to the next guy with the automobile and says, if not for you, I wouldn't have been here either. And finally, she goes into the guy to the medicine and she says, listen, says the other two, they were great and they were, but I don't need them anymore. Says the one person I will need is the guy who's, if God forbid I ever get sick again, I need you to save me. Says they were crucial in that part, but right now I need one person and I need you. And she chose to marry the guy that's, the guy that made the medicine. We have three creators in our being. We have our mother, our father, and our God. Who do we need the most? Obviously God. Our parents need God. So do we need God. God is the biggest part of us that we have to hold on to. We break them outside with that big piece, and it represents God. We take that big piece and we're saying, God, we need you more than anything. And this is the thing that we're saying, you're hiding this, and the kids are finding it. And you're showing the importance of how amazing and necessary God is to everybody's life. Says the Ben Ish Chai, that's what we're doing when we're breaking the matzah in half. I want to tell you another. This is a crazy. It looks like we're just saying stories tonight. I think stories sometimes are such a powerful way to understand something. Mm-hmm. So do we have more time?
Yeah, 29.
Okay. So I want to tell you, this is a story that I heard from Rab Zachariah Wallerstein back in 2013. It was. We're going all over the place. This is a crazy story. This is a story, though, that you have to listen to every detail because it's going to come back at the end. So there was once a king and a queen that everybody loved. Everybody loved them. They were great. They were great to the people. They were great to the ministers. They were great to the governors. Everybody was obsessed with them. There was just one problem, is that they didn't have any kids. And they wanted the bloodline to continue. So everybody would pray to their own gods, and everybody would try, give the queen different things, try this herb, maybe it'll make you pregnant, try doing this, try doing that. And everybody really, really wanted the bloodline to continue. But nothing was doing. Years and years passed. And finally, there was a miraculous thing, and she was pregnant. And 9 months later, she gives birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. And there was celebration like no one's business. The king threw the craziest celebration that the kingdom ever saw. And the years passed by, and the kid was getting a little bit older. There were some bad people in the kingdom that didn't like the king. They were the wealthy, and they wanted certain things. They were able to get. They should have gotten more money, and they were very against this bloodline continuing. They didn't want it. But God has His own plans, and God sort of took this, their plans and made reality of it. And the baby was 2 years old, and he got really sick. He got deathly ill. So much so that they brought in every doctor. Nobody was able to heal. The king said, anybody who heals my child will get rewarded beyond their wildest dreams. And every doctor flew in from everything. The biggest specialists, they all came in, and nothing. The kid was getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Finally, one of the advisors said, listen, he says, in the woods, not too far, there's a guy that lives, he's a healer of the woods, and, he's known to do miraculous, stuff. So the king says, what are you waiting for? Why'd you wait till now to tell me? Go bring him quickly. The advisor said, the guy he lives in the woods, so, that's why I didn't tell you. He's a little, he's a man of nature. The king says, I'll take whatever I can, bring him. So they go and they go into the place where they thought it was, and they kept on asking people, where's the healer, where's the healer? They keep on pointing him deeper and deeper into the woods. Finally, they get pointed in the direction they didn't even realize it looks like a house. It was completely camouflaged with the entire forest. And they realized that they knocked on whatever door that he had there, and he comes out, and they said, are you the famous healer? And he's like, yeah. He's like, we're missionaries from the king, and we ask you to please come. The king's daughter is gravely ill. So he says, the son. Sorry, thank you. The son's gravely ill. So he says, you never listened to my medicine beforehand. What makes you now? So they said, to be honest, they tried everything else and nothing else worked. So the healer said, listen, I heard a lot of good things about, this king, and I'd like to help him. He goes and he collects some stuff, his herbs, he puts it all in his doctor, whatever sack that he created, and they go out to the palace. They go and they look at the kid, and he says, I need 2 minutes alone, without anybody here in the room, to diagnose the child. He sits there for 2 minutes, he comes out, he says, I can heal him. He's like, I can heal him, but there's one condition. And the king says, what is it? He says, I need to be completely alone with the child for 2 days. Nobody can enter. So the king says, everybody was like, it doesn't work this way. So the healer said, fine, I'll walk away. You don't want my services, you don't have to. The king says, no, do whatever you got to do. And they came into agreement, and the healer said, fine. And he goes, and he makes this extremely bitter potion. And he takes this bitter potion, and he slowly puts it on the kid. The kid is bedbound. He's not able to. He slowly puts it on the kid's lips, and it slowly drips down his mouth. And it's so bitter, the kid is like gagging in his semi-conscious, being. And he puts a little bit of honey to make it a little sweeter, and he slowly gives him more and more. Every few hours, he gives him a little more drops of this medicine. And slowly, after 6-7 hours, they see that the kid's color is coming back to his face. And after another few more hours, they see they're starting to get, he's starting to, breathe much, without being labored. And then eventually the next day he's already sitting in bed. He even calls out the king before the Tuesday is over, and he says, "Please come. Your son is almost back and healthy." The king looks at it and he says, "How did you do this? This is amazing." He says, "No doctor was able to do it." So the king says, "Whatever you want, you can have." So the healer said, "Listen, money, riches, honor, those things. I'm a man in the woods. I don't care for all these things." He says, "But I do see that you have a very special boy over here, and I have a lot of knowledge, and I'm getting old on the years. I want to teach this boy everything that I know." The king says, "With pleasure." And the healer says, "I have another, little bit of an odd request." He says, "Listen, your boy, can you imagine a prince's room is bigger than most people's houses?" He says, "This is a very large room. I felt like I saved this boy. I want to always keep an eye on him. I want to put me like a tiny corner in the room that I could sleep, and I could always, observe him, make sure that he's okay." And he says, "Listen, I'm a man in the woods. I know how to blend in with anything." He says, "You're never going to realize I'm here." The boy says he's going to feel like he's alone. So the king says, "By all means, yeah, please." And he goes, and the years go by, and he slowly teaches this boy. The boy gets older and older, and he's teaching him. Once he starts realizing that he has his cognitive abilities, he's teaching him a little bit more and more. And then one night, the boy's about 6 years old. This healer, this old man, suddenly wakes up in the middle of the night, and he sees shadows come in from the window. And he's thinking to himself, he sees that people are coming to try to kidnap the prince. And he's like, what am I going to do? He says, if I scream, they're going to kill me. And if I run for get help, I'll lose them. So he figures the only thing he can do is follow them to see where they're going, and then hopefully get help whenever he's able to. And he goes, and he saw these people they were professionals. They went fast, and they moved quick. Within a few minutes, they were outside already on the ground floor, outside the castle walls. And he's following them. Being that he's a man of the woods, he knows how to stealthily move into, without being noticed. And he follows them, and they travel very quickly into a ship. And before he's even able to get any help, he sees that the ship is already getting pulled off. He figures out a way to, he swims on the other side of it, and he climbs into the ship and hides in the ship as well. And the ship goes and travels with this kid to a faraway land. And they go, and the abductors go, and they sell this kid as a slave. They put him, for auction, and they sell him. And they see the people are going in and see who's going to buy a 6-year-old kid. There was one, fat duke who was very wealthy. He had another fat little kid, and who was very mean and had no friends. And he was about the same age as this little prince. And the duke is walking around. And he says, "You know what? My son needs another friend. Let me buy him a friend." So he goes, and he says, "How much for the boy?" He says, "Whatever, son." He says, "No problem." He goes and he buys the boy. And he goes over to his son. "Hey, Dudley, here's your friend." And they go, and they're playing there, with 6-year-olds, right? So they're playing for a few months, and meanwhile, this kid, the duke's son, gets disgusted with him. He's very mean, and he's always, abusive to this kid. He says, "You know what, Dad? I don't want to play with him anymore. Put him let him work in the kitchen." So the duke says, "Whatever you want, yeah, go work." And they set him up to work in the kitchen. And meanwhile, this whole time, the old man is trying to figure out a way to bring this guy back, this prince back home. And there's zero possibilities. It's a very small kingdom. He couldn't do anything. And years passed when this prince turned into a slave of the kitchen. And 15 years passed, and he's working in the kitchen. Meanwhile, the old man had no way of getting him out. And finally, he's about 21, 22 now. This prince. And the boy decides, the duke's kid, the annoying kid, he goes, "You know what?" He says, "I'm bored. Let's make, this prince, which is he thinks as a slave, let him marry this." It was like a 450-pound woman that worked in the kitchen, right? She had a little beard. She would refuse to shower in years, and she had things growing out of her face. It was a thing that it was like the Shrek of the thing. And the kid, decided, he says, "You know what's going to be funny? Let's marry them two together. let's marry this woman with this slave. And he tells us his funny plan to his father. And the father tells him, listen, have pity on this guy. We put him he's working in the kitchen for 15 years. He's like, just let him be. You can't, come on, this woman's going to eat him. She's going to crush him. And the kid starts, throwing a tantrum at 22, right? He says, no, I'm not going to be happy until he marries her. So when the spoiled kid throws a tantrum, the father says, fine, all right, just leave me alone. Just do whatever you want. And they go, and he arranges the shidduch. He says, he knocks on the slave's door, and he goes over to the prince and says, guess what? He's getting married tomorrow. He's like, what? He's like, yeah, you're getting married. You're getting married to, he tells her the woman in the thing. And he's like, as a joke, right? He's like, it's a joke, you better be ready. He's like, you're getting married, there's no joke. It's like, you guys are going to have my babies. So he goes, and he's sitting on his bed. He's like, my life is over. That's it, I'm done. And he's sitting over there, and meanwhile, he's sitting on his little stool over there. He's thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to marry this woman? And then suddenly the old man sees all what's going on. He says, listen, now it's now or never. If he gets married, that's it. It's over. So he climbs into to the window of the slave quarters, and he says, and everyone's shocked to see him. And he goes right over to the prince, and he says, do you know who you are? And he's like, yeah, I'm a slave. And he's like, no, you're a prince. And he's like, what are you talking about, prince? I'm a slave. I've been a slave my whole life. He blocked out everything that he had beforehand. Right? All he knew was hardships. So the old man says, no, he starts explaining to him, your father has a big kingdom, and your father this, and this prince is like, yeah, sure, my father has a big kingdom, and he drives a Rolls Royce, yeah, we know the whole story, yeah, sure. And go back for where you came from. And the old man saw that he's not buying it. So
you didn't know the whole time that he was there?
No, he kept hidden the whole time. He was just looking for a way to get him out. And he realized, he still didn't find a way, but he realized it's now or never. So he goes over and he says, give me 2 hours. And the guy says, I don't know what you need to ask me permission. Do whatever you want. I don't know you. So he goes, the old man climbs out the window, comes back 2 hours later, the guy's still crying in his bed. And he comes up and he makes the potion that he made to him when he was younger. And he says, drink this. And the prince, or the slave, is like, what do you mean drink this? I never saw you before. Yeah, it could be poison. So the old man said, listen, I saw the woman that you're supposed to get married. You better hope it's poison. So the guy says, good point. And he takes a sip and he spits it out. He's like, this stuff is so bitter, so disgusting. He says, no, please, just entertain me. Try drinking a little bit. And he drinks a little bit. And he's like, it tastes so disgusting, but he's like, it tastes vaguely familiar. And he's like, where did I drink this before? And he drinks a little more. And as he drinks a little more, and suddenly, visions come back to him. He suddenly remembers a big room. And suddenly he remembers, big, nice velvet couches. And suddenly remembers a big garden and lots of horses. And slowly, very, very vaguely, he remembers a life of that he once had. And he's like shocked. He's like, you're right. I do remember something. And the old man says, come, we got to leave now. And they go, and that night they sneak out. Miraculously, they went from ship to ship to ship. Weeks later, they end up in front by the kingdom to the king. And meanwhile, this whole kingdom was completely depressed. Everyone, saw that they figured they had a prince that's going to be there. And after the prince got kidnapped, the king,
the guy took him.
The king and they thought that, yeah, the king and the queen, everybody was like, that's it, it's done. Everybody fell into depression, and it was like in the Disney movies. Everything was gray, no flowers, no birds chirping, no sunshine. It was just cloudy and no no trees. So they go and they bring this kid to they bring this prince to the front gate, and it says, I have the prince over here. So the guard said, yeah, you and everybody else. Everybody else kept on bringing their own kids. Said, oh, this is really the prince. After many years, he came back to my house, and here's the prince. Because they all tried to get their son to become that. Right. So they all said, yeah, the king's not interested anymore. And he says, no, please, I promise you, this is, and he tells them the whole story. And they saw that there's something different about it. So they said, the king hasn't seen anybody in months regarding this issue, but you seem different. Let's bring it in. So they brought it in, and the second that the king hears that it's somebody else pretending to be his son, he's like, but my son is not alive anymore. He's like, that's it, it's done. So the old man, the king didn't even look up. The old man says, listen, just all I'm asking you is just look at him. Look at him and you'll realize. And he looks at him and he looks like a splitting image that he was when he was younger. And he realized that it was his son. And they came and they reunited, and they, and all was well. Listen to the Nimshal. Listen to how amazing this is. A very, very long time ago, there was a guy by the name of Abraham. All the world did not believe in God. There was one person that came and started believing in God, and that was Abraham. And that's when the Jewish nation was born. Then the problem is, we got sick. We got sick, like the little boy got sick. We were born after many years of the king not having any children. That was Abraham. Then suddenly we got sick. We got sick because we went to Egypt. We had to go down into Egypt, and nobody could get us out there. And we were sick. And then suddenly Hashem said, "Listen, I have some medicine. Here's some matzah. Here's some maror. Here's some Pesach. Eat these things." And we're eating this thing, and suddenly we go and we become freed, and we become healthy again, like the boy becoming healthy after the old man saved him. The old man has represented God, and we become healthier. And time goes on, and we have the Bet HaMikdash, and then we have another Bet HaMikdash, and then it's destroyed, and then we're in exile. The exile is comparable to the we got kidnapped, the boy who got kidnapped. We got kidnapped into the world, and not only did we get kidnapped, we got thrown into the kitchen. We're working as slaves, and comes Pesach, and everybody says, "Guess what? Each and every one of you are all kings." We say, "What do you mean kings? I'm a lawyer. I'm a stockbroker. I'm a this. I'm a that. I'm a doctor. What do you mean a king?" I was like, "I'm far from a king, right? I work over here. I work over here. No, we're not king." And they say, "No, you're really king." And we're trying. God is convincing us, "No, you're really king. And you're all prince and princesses." He says, and we don't believe. We say, "How?" And God says, "Eat these three things. Eat Pesach, eat matzah, eat maror." And we go and we sit over there and we recline. And suddenly we eat Pesach, matzah, maror. And then our soul screams out and be like, "This is vaguely familiar. I remember this. Something's familiar." And the more that we eat about it, the more we're eating all these weird things that we have to eat on Pesach, our soul reawakens and realizes, you know what? We are kings. We are princes. We are of royalty. And this brings us in. Now you realize what we do when we do. We're going to eat all these things. It says that if you don't do these three things, you don't yotze the Pesach. If you have to do Pesach, matzah, and maror. What do we have to eat matzah? We have to go to the side. It's all things that we have inside of us. And Pesach is the time that it reawakens us to our, to who are we really supposed to be. And that is the thing that we're doing when we're eating it. That was a crazy thing. Do we have a few more minutes, or should we save it for next week?
No, I mean, you're fine.
We'll do it.
The nations.
What do you think, guys?
Those are a few intense stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot more.
Yes, please.
The question is